Hello, okay, for those of you returning to the channel, welcome back, and for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, then thank you for joining me, and welcome to my spoiler-free review of The Running Man, directed by Edgar Wright, and based on the Stephen King novel of the same name. Now, I've never read the novel, but I grew up watching the 1987 adaptation with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I haven't seen it in years, but I just remember really enjoying it. It was wild, it was over the top, it was violent, it was camp, and I've been meaning to revisit it, but I just haven't got around to it. But it's been years since I've watched it, and so I'm not going to be able to compare this adaptation to the novel. But I've been looking forward to it because I am a big fan of Edgar Wright as a director, even though, based on my memory of the first adaptation, the 1987 movie, I felt like Edgar Wright was maybe a weird choice, but it could still work. So, The Running Man, set in a grim near future, TV's biggest show is a deadly contest. Runners are hunted for 30 days by elite assassins, all while the public watches and wagers. Ben Richards, a working class dad with a sick daughter, joins the game as a last-ditched effort to save her. As he tries to survive and outsmart the hunters, his defiance and grit make him an unlikely fan favourite, but also a threat to the powerful people running the show. So The Running Man is a dystopian action thriller, and I really enjoy these kind of movies, these kind of stories. It is very different to the 1987 adaptation, and it has a story that is very similar to other stories or films like The Hunger Games, another series of movies that I've never actually read, the novels in which it's adapting. But I've always enjoyed these stories, and they always eerily reflect or mirror a world that we are currently in or could end up being. And that is something that I've always found fascinating by these stories. And I think that's the one thing that this movie does, or the one aspect of this movie and its story that they do really well here, in sort of the themes in which they are exploring, like around exploitation, and taking these everyday people, working class people, and putting them into a situation where they really have to be in because they are desperate, whether it be because your daughter is dying, and then have elements within its story wherever it be deep fake or, changing or manipulating the narrative and all of that. And I feel like, for the most part, they do that pretty well here with Edgar Wright's The Running Man. We have these stories that are based in the near future, but are also very relatable because they are exploring very familiar themes and stories when it comes to these characters and their situations. And, there is an aspect of the movie that did remind me of similar movies from the 80s and the 90s, and I think that is definitely something that Edgar Wright was aiming for when crafting this movie, bringing this story to life. Does he achieve that? I don't think so. You could kind of see it. You could kind of sense, or I did anyway, I could kind of sense that was what he was aiming for, maybe, in sort of the style of the movie, in sort of really kind of capturing those science fiction, dystopian, satire, action movies from the 80s and the 90s, like RoboCop, for example. RoboCop sort of comes straight to the top of my mind there. And I definitely sensed it. But as a whole, as an overall experience, I don't think he was quite successful at really capturing the essence of those movies. And then that kind of leads me into sort of the tone and the direction of this movie. It doesn't feel like an Edgar Wright film. And, it really stood out, especially when you get those, there are very kind of brief, small moments within the movie where they did feel very much like an Edgar Wright film. Like, for example, there's a scene with Glen Powell's character, and he's talking to Josh Brolin in his office, and it's a scene with a brief moment of humour, that really did make me laugh. Like, I chuckled, and, you know, it was classic Edgar Wright, but it also stood out. And then there'll be another moment later on, it'll be an action scene, and it's actually one of the only moments that is really kind of burnt into my memory, because it was a really fun, enjoyable scene. And it's a car chase scene. They're being chased by these two goons on motorbikes. And that moment, just the way in which it's played out, in how the camera is used, I fucking loved it. And it was classic Edgar Wright, because of just, you know, it had that classic Edgar Wright stamp, that classic Edgar Wright style in the way in which he shoots his movies, that kind of the very kind of quick, chaotic zaniness to it. You know, it's very ecstatic in the way in which he uses the camera, and it's a very brief moment. It's a great scene. I love it. I loved it. It was a great action moment, but it was like, also frustrating, because it had me wishing or wanting an experience that really leaned more into the style of Edgar Wright that we all know and love. I mean, not everyone loves Edgar Wright, you know, and his style of filmmaking, but for me personally, that was what I was hoping for with this experience. And you get it in moments, but as a whole, as one whole experience, it just really didn't feel like an Edgar Wright movie. And so, as a result, it kind of felt like the entire experience had a bit of an identity crisis. Like, it didn't really know what kind of direction or tone it really wanted to go with when telling this story. Glen Powell as Ben Richards, our main character here. I really like Glen Powell. I really liked him in Twisters, and I really liked him in Top Gun Maverick. And so I was excited when it was announced that he would be starring here in The Running Man. But I couldn't help but feel like, throughout almost the entire duration, like, he does, you know, his character does grow on you, but I still couldn't help but feel like that maybe he was, unfortunately, miscast here. But then, reflecting on the movie more, I feel like that maybe it's not actually Glen Powell, you know, that is the issue, because Glen Powell is great here. I mean, I like Glen Powell. He has charisma, and I like what he was trying to do with the character, but there was something that was just off about the character. You know, I never felt like I really fully understood him or his personality and his quirks. And so when you get these kind of wild moments where he's just ranting at a camera and sticking his finger up, it always stood out because it never felt quite natural or organic. And I think a lot of that really did lie within the writing and the setup of this movie. That first 20 minutes, 30 minutes where they're introducing us to these characters and their situations. You know, it's within the setup where they're implementing this kind of very big beating heart, you know, the emotional core of its story, where they are introducing us to the situation in which our characters are in. You know, with them not being able to afford the medicine for their dying child. And, you know, it's so clunky and breezy in how they set up these characters and their situations within the first 20 minutes that you just never really truly, or I didn't anyway, I never felt like I truly got to understand the character of Ben Richards. And so then when you get those odd moments of humour, maybe, you know, those kind of very classic moments of Edgar Wright, it would just really stick out. And as a result, because I never fully grasped the character and the personality of Ben Richards, because of the way in which he's written and how he is set up within this story, I could never really sort of get on board sort of that emotional journey in which he's on. You know, it doesn't have the emotional energy or momentum running throughout its story that I felt like they were maybe hoping to have achieved or to have had within this experience. And I think a lot of that is down to a lack of a distinct vision and style and writing. And I just feel like that maybe this is an experience that would have benefited from just Edgar Wright going just full throttle and just being Edgar Wright. Because like I said, when you get those moments, they're fucking great. Like that car chase scene, it does really stick out because I was like, oh, this is Edgar Wright. Where have you been hiding? You know, just the way in which that entire scene is shot. I was fucking loving it. And you get moments like that throughout the entire experience, but it does lack an identity. But I still couldn't help but be engaged, be immersed because of what they're exploring within the story and its themes. And because, you know, like I said, Glen Powell, he has the charisma and he's doing his best with what he's got, you know, with the writing. And, you know, I can't help but be on board with the journey, even though I am not as deeply immersed emotionally as maybe I feel like they were hoping for when it comes to bringing to life this particular adaptation, this particular version of the story. You know, it is the charisma of Glen Powell and the themes that they're exploring, and the fact that, you know, for the most part, I was immersed because of, you know, I was just intrigued by its story and what they were attempting here. Like, when the running game first starts, the actual game starts, you know, I felt the danger. I felt the urgency. Like, that does kind of vanish as you go into the third act, as things become a little bit more chaotic and certain aspects or elements of the story start to reveal themselves. But I was, you know, I was always sort of locked in. But coming out of the movie, coming away from it, yes, there are aspects to it that I liked, but other than that car chase scene that I keep bringing up, you know, it doesn't really stay with me. There was somewhat of a flatness to it, you know, to the entire experience. Like Josh Brolin, like, I love Josh Brolin, and I liked what he was attempting to do with the character. At the same time, it's not a villain that's going to sort of stay with you. You know, you're not going to remember him as being this classic, iconic villain that's going to, you know, end up having this kind of classic status. You know, the villain that is played here by Josh Brolin, he's not going to be like another classic, iconic villain from the movies in which this particular film is trying to be from the 80s and the 90s, like Clarence Bodica, for example. I mean, I'm just sort of randomly picking Clarence there because he is, for me personally, a very iconic, classic villain where the actor portraying, you know, the actor bringing that villain to life was very effective at bringing a character to life that you really despise, but also can't help but admire by the way in which he's brought to life because it's such an effective performance. And yeah, it was just a little flat when it comes to Josh Brolin and what he was sort of doing with his character. It kind of just lacked the weight and the impact that I feel like a movie like this needs when it comes to its villain. So I wouldn't say this was an absolute mess. I mean, I know I sort of mentioned tone, and I wouldn't say this was, you know, tonally a disaster or tonally messy, because it still kind of works, but you just get those kind of briefest moments where that kind of the Edgar Wright, sort of the classic Edgar Wright stamp sort of sticks its head through and goes, oh, remember, I'm the one that's directing this? And that's how it felt. And then it sort of just goes back to being a very kind of almost generic dystopian action thriller that is trying to capture the essence of movies and stories in which it's based on or adapting from an era, you know, from an era of films that I grew up watching. Unfortunately, it doesn't really fully achieve that, but you kind of sense it. But I wouldn't say this was unwatchable. I enjoyed it. I said in my reaction video coming out of the theatre, which I'm thinking of doing more of those, by the way. But I came out liking it because there are elements and aspects to it that I did really enjoy. But as one overall experience, it was just lacking a personality, not just with its characters, but as a whole, as an entire experience. It was just lacking an identity and a personality. And especially when you've got someone like Edgar Wright attached directing as well as co-writing, you know, you are kind of going in expecting something different, and this just felt a little bit too safe at times and perhaps a little bit too familiar and generic. But at the same time, I couldn't still help but be engaged. I was always locked in, and a lot of that is because of Glen Powell, you know, and that charisma that he oozes. I just like Glen Powell as an actor. I loved him in Twisters, and I think he is trying his best here in the material that he's got. And again, because of the themes in which they are exploring and certain elements of its story, you know, that do really reflect the world that we're in today and the direction in which the world is going in, it does make the entire experience quite relevant and relatable as well. So yeah, a bit of a mixed one for me. Like, I didn't hate this. I liked it. I had fun with it. I do recommend you check it out. You know, there is definitely fun to be had with this experience. Yeah, they are my thoughts on Edgar Wright's The Running Man, and I will be giving The Running Man my thoughts on Edgar Wright's The Running Man. But what do you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you prefer the 1987 adaptation? Let me know below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. I am thinking of doing more of the out of theatre reactions. But what do you guys think? What do you guys want? Would you like to see more of those videos, those shorts from me where I share with you all my initial thoughts on the film that I've just experienced at the cinema? Let me know. And just another big thank you to everyone that has supported the channel, to all the most recent subscribers. It will always overwhelm me that so many of you do want to follow just some random Welsh geek rambling on about film and TV and pronouncing things incorrectly and all of that. And so yeah, I'm kind of setting myself a target now for the end of the year. I'm hoping to hit 600 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm currently on, at the time of filming, 546, and so yeah, I'm hoping to hit 600. So yeah, that's it from me for now, guys. Thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be catching you guys soon.